Hot Water History, episode 132, Thursday morning. Richard, what's going on?
The Butcher of Gaza is at the American Knesset and delivering speeches, and anyone who dares to question his history or his chronology of the genocide going on in Palestine, well, then, according to Speaker Mike Johnson, not only are you a rabid anti-Semite, but you're liable to be thrown in jail. So, welcome to the Israeli state of the United States. What a vassal state we've become.
Where's the butcher?
Whereas the butcher is in Washington, D.C.
Oh, he's in DC.
Yeah, he's in Netanyahu's in DC delivering an address. So he actually delivered it yesterday.
How was that? Did you listen to all of it?
No, I tend not to listen to genocidal maniacs who happen to be Talmudic Jews who want to destroy other people's lives, have no remorse about eliminating now tens of thousands of Palestinian lives who he obviously sees as no greater, having a greater dignity than dogs or vermin. So I guess I should, as a historian, take a look at that. But I think it's sort of like listening to a speech from Stalin in 1933 or 1945. You're going to get the gist just by knowing that Stalin's opened his mouth.
The cost of your sanity versus, I guess,
Hmm.
historical, whatever you want to call it.
Acumen.
Yeah.
Hmm. Well, we know one recent convert to Catholicism who is having none of this.
Candace, she's the best in the game right now. I don't
She's
know. You sent me a message, I think it was last week or the week before, saying, is Candace for real? And I've been saying 2024 Candace is on a special run. Not a lot of people go on this run as a journalist as she's gone on this year. And I think she's not only legit, I think there could be some extremely demonic attacks on her. Obviously, there already are, but I'm surprised that she hasn't been, at least not to my knowledge, had her life threatened by just how much she's standing in the way of everything else. And maybe that's a case for saying, well, that might show that she's not totally legit, or that might show that, or the if they know your name, you're in the game argument.
Mhm.
But I think she's this year as legit as it gets and as solid as it gets.
And a mild correction, I think she did post it, unless I'm confusing her with some other very based anti-normie, now very much awake individual of considerable prominence. She did post that she does receive death threats. So,
Yeah, but I mean,
oh,
I not from your random person. I'm
mm,
saying let's just assume for James Dellingful's sake that the Trump assassination was legit.
okay.
That type of event.
Oh, I see. Sure. Yes. And she's participated in the pilgrimage to Chartres in France. She's obviously very much embraced her Catholic faith, the faith of her husband, who was key and instrumental in her conversion. And the most, the thing that I most admire about her is that she's, once she goes down a rabbit hole, it's of genuine interest. And then she has this immense desire and passion to really really take up as much information and then make a decision, do some analysis and evaluation about that. So when she's speaking about the Bolshevik slaughter of Christians to the tune of over 10 million, in the Russian Revolution and the decades that followed, and that in a very disproportionate amount of the Gulag operators and even the basis of a concentration camp is not German, to be sure, in nature. It's from the Bolsheviks. The Germans, the Nazis got it from the Bolsheviks as a means by which to commit mass genocide. Um, so she's highlighting this fact that a disproportionate number of the both Gulag prisoners and the administrators and the officials were Jewish within the Bolshevik regime. And you're never going to hear that. And for our own approach, hermeneutic, and our own work in history that we've accomplished either through the book or the podcast or all things that I've written about since I was a baby historian, an amateur historian, and then more into the professional historian world, is to question why we don't learn about those things. And this is what Candace is awakening to, and what I think she finds the most both disheartening but also enlightening that she's going to pursue with a great deal of courage, regardless of who is disaffected or what groups would like to claim monopoly minority or monopoly a monopoly of victimization, self-victimization.
And the Daily Wire stuff was this year, right?
Yes, it was the beginning of the year.
So this has been a year for her. Daily
She's got the
Wire,
third largest podcast around. It's like,
regardless of category.
yeah, I'm pretty sure. She's just huge. People want authenticity. People want to understand, as we stated within the book emphatically from the beginning, we have an innate desire for the truth. We're drawn to that, made in the image and likeness of God. We want meaning. And when people look around in their world and understand that and come to the correct conclusion that the official narratives on history just don't seem to bear out with the way the world functions or how it exists today, we have a natural attraction, inclination, and penchant to discover why that is. And then rightfully identify the perpetrators of historical fraud as simply sinister actors whose assertions ought to be invalidated so that we might grow in understanding of the true, the good, and the beautiful. If we have a skewed vision of history, not only is our worldview skewed, but of course, the information feeding that is all corrupted. I would go so far as to say those who we admire in the public sphere, yes, Pache, Mary Finch, if we know their name, they're in the game, maybe to a degree, or in Candace's case, maybe she was in the game and no longer wants to play. And as a result, the Delling polls and James will tell you that he was once, in a sense, in the game because he was a unawakened, excuse me, slumbering journalist in the mainstream, hanging out with rockers like the Rolling Stones and Led Zeppelin, and doing cultural pieces in the Daily Mail and the Spectator and the like. But now he understands that all of that is quite demonic and part of the cabal. So it's with great fervor that they wish to discover. And I think this is what I would assert, this is what Candace is going through. And we're grateful for that. That type of, it takes a lot of valor to do that.
What's next for her? Does she just keep getting bigger?
I can't imagine there's any brakes on that train or outside forces that are going to try to derail her. That thankfully, in this odd circumstance in which we find ourselves in a historical moment, there's really a lot of what we might call invalidating moments. And so people are right, even normies who would tend toward and wish for the comfort of normiedom are willing to listen. I think there's a greater appetite for that than ever before because all of the institutions that were supposed to have instant and prima facie credibility have now been shown to be largely frauds. And if there's ever the case for our favorite institution of democracy to be questioned more than ever before, is then when you're trying to, or as the powers that be in the Democratic Party are trying to orchestrate both a coup of the president, the standing president, and a simultaneous election of a Dauphin. In this case, if they're going to try to elevate this dunce of a Dauphin and Princess Kamala to some sort of realm of power. So there's an appetite, there's a will, there's a desire, there's a scratch that needs to be itched in people's curiosity. Hopefully that continues.
So I think that's another reason why she gets even bigger is the Kamala piece to this.
Okay.
That the entire racial identity politic angle, it's ruined with Candace. You don't have to be the famous Joe Biden Charlemagne interview where he talks about if you vote for Donald Trump, you ain't black. People know that's invalid now. And I think Candace being black
She's black?
woman,
I'm just kidding.
being a black woman is something that with Kamala running, especially, it's not an angle that they can really play when you've got one of the most famous podcasters in the world talking about how dumb this all is.
Right. All true.
So I hope she keeps growing.
Speaking of historical fact versus fiction,
Let's hear it.
well, one of the myths that has to be, and it's a great case of how a historical fabrication can lead to enormously negative and destructive ramifications, and that's the whole Canadian boarding school slash Kamloops scandal that yet again is one of these instances that shows a vitriolic hatred by the secular progressive world, which is firmly in the claws of the demonic, to destroy the traditional Catholic Church, its institutions, and especially its reputation, lest souls come to the truth and determine that indeed it is the portal of salvation, the body of Christ through which we are saved by his precious blood, his most precious blood, born for us on the cross, shed for us on the cross. So the Mises Institute has had a wonderful piece about the whole Kamloops scandal, and Charlie's going to bring that up for those watching the video, but we'll hit some of the high points, and then I want to speak at some length, although not the entirety of the podcast to be sure, about really why such a thing could transpire in our own time. So for those unfamiliar, we could even start with the whole thesis and opening paragraph of this piece from the Mises Wire by Wendy McElroy. The scandal surrounding Canada's Kamloops Indian Residential School, which operated from 1890 to 1969 in British Columbia, is an extra cautionary tale about the damage inflicted by self-interested politicians and activists, backed by a media that toes the line. In 2021, again, all the way back 3 years ago, this scandal sprang from the alleged discovery of 215 graves of Indigenous children in Western Canada. They were said to have died under suspicious circumstances at the Catholic-run school and then buried in unmarked graves behind the facility. Kamloops was one of the largest residential schools in the system, through which Indigenous children were culturally deprogrammed and indoctrinated to mold into proper Canadians. When the story broke, the press fell over itself in a race to sensationalism. CBC, that's Canadian Broadcast Channel, News, on May 28th of that year declared, in quote, remains of 215 children found buried at former BC residential school, First Nation says. The Toronto Star announced on May 28th the remains of 215 children have been found. Now Indigenous leaders say Canada must help find the rest of the unmarked graves. The international press jumped on the speeding news train with their own headlines, such as, in quote, horrible history, mass grave of Indigenous children reported in Canada, reported in the Old Gray Lady of the New York Times as late as May 31st. So, or I should say as early as May 31st, because you could tell how quickly the New York Times was willing to jump on this narrative despite sending what? No reporters to investigate the validity of the claims, right? Now, here's the kicker. Actually, no graves had been nor have been discovered, and their existence was extrapolated from what were called at the time, in quote, anomalies in the earth found by ground penetrating radar. Such anomalies are commonplace. However, they usually indicate a tree root or a large rock or some other innocuous presence. Today, after 3 years and almost $8 million of publicly unaccountable funds being expended by the Canadian authorities, no graves have been found. No one has bothered to even start the digging necessary to verify anything. As a result, and this is not directly from the article, this is me opining. I'm sorry, it's not opining, it's just relaying information. Hundreds to the count of 800, over 800 Catholic churches and institutions have been vandalized and some burned to the ground, many burned to the ground. An all-out attack of arson, widespread arson throughout Canada transpired. The Pope, in a visit, went and donned the sacred headdress of Native Americans, of a chief of Native Americans, and apologized profusely for what ends up being an entirely fabricated lie. This is the ramification. And of course, the lie spread around the earth, what, 15 million times before any of the truth was drawn out. In fact, there were a number of scholars as far eastern as in Canada as Montreal, which have written as late as 2023, but as early as September of that year, now investigating, well, not only was this clearly a lie perpetuated to what, satisfy or scratch the itch of anti-Catholicism within Canada. Well, I mean, you had a writer come out in an anthology entitled, with several other scholars, it was entitled in late 2023, so just last year, Grave Error: How the Media Misled Us and the Truth About Residential Schools. I happen to have read that. I can't remember the um, the compiler or editor of that piece. So, what are your thoughts here, Charlie?
Shaking my head. I think it gets better when they get into the hate crime and comparing it to Holocaust denial. And
yeah, so there's a paragraph that begins in response at the bottom of the page you're showing we can read that. In response to a growing backlash, the special interlocutor assigned to the Kamloops criminal case asked Parliament to make denialism of this matter illegal under the criminal code. Now, mind you, of course, this is after it's been convincingly and unassailably proven that this is a concoction of both media and state, the media state complex, aimed at these Catholic residential schools. By the way, the vast majority of the First Nations people And former residents of the schools, who many of whom are still alive today, said nothing of this maltreatment took place. They recorded, and when they were interviewed, they contradicted the story of the of the official narrative, saying that they remember fondly and they still practice their faith. Many of the churches that have been burned are in what is the Canadian version of Indian locales and reservations or nations. And of course, the people who are disaffected by the church's burning are the same Native Americans who are supposed to have been victimized by this hoax or by this attack on their culture. It's just, this is insane. And this is what Wendy McElroy does such a great job of chronicling. So she writes, in response to the growing backlash, the special interlocutor, as I had mentioned, tried to make, of course, this denialism illegal. Those who express public skepticism of the residential school, the maltreatment of these individuals, would be vulnerable to prosecution for a hate crime in Canada in much the same manner as those who denied the Holocaust. Under Section 319 of the Criminal Code, the willful promotion of anti-Semitism, unless in a private conversation, could lead up to 2 years in prison. This includes condoning, denying, or downplaying the Holocaust. Discussion of Kamloops would receive the same treatment. On November 26th of 2023, again less than a year ago, the Canadian press reported that Justice Minister Arif Virani was still considering how to criminalize residential school denialism. Of course, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau expressed sympathy for the idea. Because when you're a WEF son of Castro, who's clearly in the cabal and clearly owned, and a famous subject of Bob Moran cartoons in blackface, that's what you do. What this all means, of course, and hopefully there is a response and a reflexive backlash to all this, that although it comes in tepid and timid fashion, is that people further awaken, whether it's in Canada and beyond, I hope it's beyond, to the rest of the world, of how owned the historical the historical profession is, how woke it is, how lost it is, and then furthermore, how lazy and, I would argue, criminally slothful the media is in twisting, bending history, which is supposed to be that elevated and beautiful discipline by which we tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help us, God, for the illumination of people's minds as they search out for meaning in their daily lives of how the world functions and how it ought to function in many ways. So a more than healthy amount of skepticism and cynicism directed toward the ensconced authorities is merited here and is always merited. It reminds me of a time that I was pulled before an administrative meeting. It was the first time I was suspended from work at my old place of employment. And the president of the high school declared that I was unworthy to teach history there because I believed, or I had said in class, that yes, Calvin Coolidge was a better president than FDR. Of course, this is a person with little to no historical knowledge of American history. So, and to suggest that Calvin Coolidge was not a better president than FDR is just it's risible and ridiculous. Just know them by their effects. Just apply the Gamaliel principle to it, or to both men. The world's got to awaken, wake up. It needs a good shaking. And if there's ever a time for that type of quaking, the Quakers were called such because they quaked during prayer. They shook during prayer. That's what people observed of them. And we need a cultural quaking, especially as it pertains to history and how it shapes, informs, and directs our lives. Without it, we're very misdirected and very, thus, as Bernard Lewis, the great historian of the Middle East, said, very vulnerable to scoundrels. And the scoundrels abound.
Here they show the stats on the churches that got destroyed. And then here's a map.
Oh, thank you. So it's 100, and what this was in February 2024. I think the number that stuck out to me was 800. I've read somewhere that it's over 800 churches as a result of this. There's a map throughout Canada of the different institutions, schools, hospitals, and churches. I mean, whoa, that one is way up in Northwest Territories, huh? Or in Yukon Territory? Holy cow. Yeah, because that place with all of its grandeur,
This thing.
yeah, that little church that's built up in the what is the Arctic Circle, right?
It's a fishing port.
It's a port for fishermen, so Inuit fishermen.
Yeah.
Okay,
That's the sea
it's
right
li-
here.
it's in the Arctic. It's on the Arctic Ocean. That it's an Anglican church. It looks like that one was burned. So the arsonists are indiscriminate. What was that one, Charlie? Up in yet another Arctic Circle, Church of the Good Shepherd, Anglican church again. So nice indiscriminate. Are you just looking at Anglican churches that have been burned? We find a Catholic one. There's Mennonite. I wonder if the site you're looking at doesn't include the Catholic churches. God's Lake, yeah. Oh, see, you're looking at a site that just looks at the Protestant churches, I think, that have been burned or vandalized. We're talking about more than 800. Oh, it says 100 Christian churches. So, yeah.
No, I think there's some.
Okay, we'll take it. Let's see.
Well, let's just
Oh, St. Columba has to be Catholic, I would
yeah,
think.
St.
St.
Anne's.
Anne's. Ah, there we go. Okay. I mean, Grace Lutheran, Our
Our
Lady
Lady
of
of Peace.
Peace. Yeah. Is there any greater sign of a culture and civilization in rapid decline than when the nefarious actors that exist within it want to unmoor and destroy any trace of the goodness of the tradition of that civilization? And the best of what makes civilization is Christianity. The Catholic Church is the mode of perfection of Western civilization, to the degree that Western civilization attunes itself, attaches, and holds fast to the Catholic Church. That's where its true perfection lies, where its goodness, its truth, and its beauty exist. Outside of it, it's random philosophical ramblings and institutions like Roman law, which are only good insofar as they pertain to the truth in Jesus Christ and his church.
I want to read this paragraph. This is talking about how the Canadian government, we say this in America that the government owns the media. They literally own the media.
Yes.
Quote, while the current system covers 25% of the journalist's costs up to $55,000 per employee, the government's fall economic statement increases both the percentage covered and cap per employee. Under the new system, which is retroactive to the start of this year, 2023, qualified Canadian journalism organizations, which covers print and digital but not broadcasters, can now claim 35% of the cost of journalist expenditures up to $85,000 per employee. It increases the support to up to $29,750 per employee, or an increase of 116%. This new support will run for 4 years at a cost of $129 million, $60 million this year alone.
All to peddle destructive and ruinous lies.
There you go.
But
Wow.
those journalists are going to need a lot of energy. In Canada, of course, it's going to have to be green energy, despite the fact that they're sitting on a treasure trove of natural gas and petroleum and other fossil fuel resources, including coal. But as it turns out, the Chinese, well, they seem to be way ahead of us in one area, among others. You want to shift to that next story?
Sure.
So it was just relayed on Twitter this week, and I'm not a nuclear physicist, nor do I pretend to be, but we can truly assess and just through application of our intellects and reason that, and there could be, and there ought to be by this point, given the progress of technology, particularly in the energy sphere, that there ought to be alternatives. And nuclear has always been, and struck me, and in reading books like Fossil Future by Alex Epstein and the true heroes in this space, that nuclear is a great answer. As it, I almost sound Trumpian here, where everything ought to be deployed for our energy needs. And here are the Chinese headline from this piece from where's this from, Charlie? Did we ever determine
I
the link?
have no,
I don't
I
know,
don't
but
know.
it's a Chinese report, so oh well. But it says a Chinese nuclear reactor is completely meltdown proof. The first ever full-scale demonstration of a nuclear reactor designed to passively cool itself in an emergency was a success. Now get this, this is what hit me, showing that it should be possible to build nuclear plants without the risk of dangerous meltdown. And as you read the piece and you scroll down further, they literally, just as a test, they took the cooling system and they deactivated the powered cooling system on the reactor to see if it would work, if the reactor would self-cool. And it did. There was no meltdown. There was no radiation leak. It's quite amazing, right?
Yeah, that's world changing. The very
So it's the source was New Scientist. The article was posted there. So New Scientist. Now, New Scientist right there. Chinese nuclear reactor is completely meltdown proof, and they have pictures of it. It's nice of the Chinese Communist government to allow that. Only for you guys, you little commie bastards out there.
oh
But it's not. But it's behind a paywall. So you you want to get the New Scientist piece, then you gotta pay the little paywall. But again, so the scandal of the Green New Deal, the scandal of all this waste, James Delingpole's watermelons is it's of course anything green at this point, anything sustainable. As we talked on the Delingpole or the episode with James the other day about how the windmills are just absolutely destroying waterfowl and birds of prey populations wherever they're put. That woman in Sweden or whatever is going and just picking up these large birds who have been their tails and claws and wings lopped off, and then they just plummet to the ground because of these, what do you call them? Eco shredders of birds, of bird populations. I think that was James's line there. And yet here we have these obvious answers to solve energy needs and demand. And the Chinese are producing self-cooling plants and technology Meanwhile, we're restricting coal usage. I mean, this is again the decadence. How to bring down the greatest civilization right at its work. This reminds me, there was a famous tale from 17th century Spain, and it really encapsulates the decline of the once great Spanish Empire and the de-evolution of the Spanish Golden Age. Forgive me, I think it was in the early 18th century under one of the Spanish Bourbon kings. And there's the French under Louis XIV by this point in the early 18th century had built the Canal des Deux Mers, which is the canal that connects the Atlantic Ocean in southwest France and river systems to the Mediterranean. And it was a major coup at the time economically because it enlivened trade, exchange, and transport within Greater France to a large degree. And there was at the time an advisory council, um, kind of like the Spanish version of the Russian Duma to the Tsar, but to the Spanish Bourbon king at the time. I can't remember if it was a Philip or what have you, but they met and there was a plan to build a canal very much similar to the French Canal de Mer in northeastern Spain that would connect the Manizales River with some other outlet. And rather than building the canal to facilitate exchange and commerce, the group just declared after studying the issue that if God had wanted the rivers to connect, then he would have made them so. And so they didn't fund the project. That anti-progress, anti-scientific, and then to use the excuse that God does not want us to progress so as to ameliorate the human condition, and blame it on God. Well, he should have made the rivers connect so we could just throw our hands in the air. Is similar to this, wherein we have these immense needs for human progress. Energy is tied to civilization, progress, and human achievement, and further technological advancement. And here's this self-cooling reactor built and functional in China, which does not emit any CO2. And of course, CO2 it's just plant food. It's not a toxin. But even if you want to just go that route and have this produced, it's available. But what do we want? We want to starve the world out of it. There we go.
Do you want to talk about a town that could also use some quaking?
Yeah, instead of that, the old Moore concrete factory in southwestern Oak Park, they should just turn that into a little nuclear reactor. They'd have energy for Oak Park for years in their little biosphere they want to create. Here's our segment.
Meanwhile in Oak Park.
Should go to your gay suburb now.
You've promised me this is a good one, Charlie. Let's see if it lives up to expectations.
This is a good one. We got a couple, the better one's the second one, but this one's really good too. OP trustees hire a firm to create economic vitality plan. The plan is intended to strengthen the local economy.
Ooh, what's a great economic vitality plan? Laissez-faire economics.
There we go.
How about we have the free market function? Get the Oak Park boot or high heel worn by a tranny off its neck.
Oak Park is working to bolster its economy and ensure both short and long-term vitality by hiring Camoin Associates, Inc. to create a comprehensive plan.
These consulting firms are, wow. Talk about capitalizing on idiocy and ineptitude.
It will take about 7 months to create the plan, beginning in July 2024. The consultants plan to visit Oak Park at least 3 times in that period to conduct focus groups, a community open house and interviews, and to tour local sites. The village board is tentatively expected to formally adopt the plan in February 2025. Village officials said that the board can expect an economic vitality conditions analysis, detailed market analysis, community survey and findings report, and situational assessment presentation to come out of the process, as well as the final implementation plan. Camoin Associates, Inc. is an economic development and lead generation firm and one of 3 firms that responded to the village's request for proposals.
I wonder how
Camoin-
many firms just said, no, we're not doing this.
Camoin had the lowest cost of $125,000. Some of that is budgeted, but the village will be pulling $47,500 from its 2024 savings to cover the cost, according to village officials.
Well, you get a windfall of cash from the COVID debacle and hoax, and then you call it savings. Operation savings.
125K for 7 months of consulting. And
I thought it was going to be much higher, to tell you the truth.
and they only visit Oak Park three times.
They're going to be fine. It's going to be fine.
It is important, trustees emphasized Tuesday, to ensure the plan takes into consideration the diversity of the town and implements inclusion in its practices. Okay. So it's not actually about economic vitality.
Economic development.
What the plan will do, according to Brandon Crawford, the village's deputy director of development services, there are 7 goals associated with this project. 1, to deliver a data-driven assessment of baseline economic vitality metrics. 2, to understand the village's economy within regional, state, and national ones. 3, to identify redevelopment sites and corridors. 4, to gather community input. 5, to develop a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats analysis, and a strengths, opportunities, aspirations, and results analysis. 6, to analyze staff and resource allocation. And 7, to create an implementation playbook over a 2-year period.
Notice the acronym for the second one is SOAR. Let Oak Park soar.
Yeah. Lindsay Johnson, the senior project manager from Camoin, said the firm has an untraditional and more holistic approach to
Did you
economic.
freeze?
Lindsay Johnson, the senior project manager from Camoin, said the firm has an untraditional and more holistic approach to economic development. Camoin looks at all the aspects of what makes a community thrive, including workforce, small businesses, and entrepreneurship, she said. That is what makes, that's literally what makes a community thrive. And that's it. It's just that. Including workforce, small businesses, and entrepreneurship. That is what makes.
What else would make it thrive?
There's nothing else.
There's nothing, right? Outside of entrepreneurship and the accumulation of capital goods and capital investment, nothing, literally nothing, except the profits derived from those things, which are part and parcel of entrepreneurship. Well, nothing else makes anything thrive economically.
With that approach, Johnson said the Camoin team can work to bolster the village board's goals of affordability, health and safety, racial equity, vibrant, diverse, and connected neighborhoods, sustainability, and economic vitality.
Now, here's the question I want everyone to ponder here. If diversity, equity, inclusion are always spoken of as sources of great vitality, wealth, goodness, then why do they have to be forced and jammed into any type of economic plan? In other words, wouldn't they just simply, by their nature, be part and parcel of sound entrepreneurship, capitalistic development, and the like? But because they're anathema to such things, they have to be forced in the square peg in the round hole. And whenever you force and create an artificiality in the otherwise efficient execution and running of human action and economy, then of course it's just throwing a wrench into the works. And these are big wrenches. So how do I don't see how they don't ask themselves that question.
Well, we really care about the quality of control and transparency involved in our process, Johnson said. Crawford said this plan will be the baseline for initiatives moving forward. It will eventually become outdated as times change, but can be modified as needed for now.
You're going to need another 125 grand.
The economy is always changing, but we are who we are, he said.
Well, literally, you're not. You're literally not. We are who we are. You're the person you are for a moment in time. That's such a self-contradictory. The economy is human action is the economy. It's humans always modifying. Yes, I'll use the word diversifying modes of unease and the desire to satisfy or sate or to quell that uneasiness, as Mises would say, that is the economy. You're not there's nothing more at the core of socialistic Fabianistic Marxism than an assertion that humans' needs and appetites are stagnant and fixed. That's at the core of economic theories that are at war with the free market and human freedom too. The economy is our changing appetites, and again, the modes by which we freely choose to extinguish the uneasiness that is natural to the human condition.
Having a plan like this, which also might include incentives for businesses or property owners, is more efficient than working on an, quote, ad hoc basis, village manager Kevin Jackson pointed out, and it helps the village use public resources most efficiently.
By spending 125 grand on an outside firm to tell you what you should be doing in your own job.
Okay, it gets better.
Sure.
Probably the best paragraph of the week coming up. Trustees' thoughts.
This is definitely the byline that's
Trustee Corey Wesley asked about the racial makeup of the all-white Camoin team assigned to work with Oak Park, given the racial diversity at Oak Park and on the village board table itself.
Here comes the square peg.
Dan Gunderson, the senior vice president of Camoin, said their team works to respect diversity in every community they work with by ensuring all segments of a community have their voices heard.
And we do that best by never hiring a black person.
Quote, we have a very, very good reputation in the field for being successful in integrating different voices, Gunderson said.
Well, he did a Biden there. You say it twice, that means it's true.
He also described racial disparity assignments Camoin has conducted and ways they've helped underrepresented communities and businesses thrive. Quote, we could not do that if we didn't first reach out in a trusting way in an environment of respect, Gunderson said.
Now give us that 125 grand.
Trustee Chibuke Inyia said he wanted to know what other towns in Camoin has worked with that have smaller geographical borders but large populations like Oak Park. Gunderson said one similar community their team worked with was Powell, a suburb of Columbus, Ohio. Quote, they did not want to be a suburb without character, and it was very clear that they weren't, Gunderson said. Oak Park is very special, it's unique, and so too is every community. Powell, according to Gunderson, followed through on all the recommendations Camoin set out. When that happens, Gunderson said they knew they've helped the community work toward their goals.
Quote, all these generalities, goals, and expectations.
Quote, when we make recommendations, we have to be thinking about what could conceivably happen And what might the village be able to do to ensure that these actions and the intentions, the recommendations, are going to have a longer life so that they can be implemented and adapted over time, Gunderson said.
This guy is perfect for Oak Park. Perfect. Just wants to have the conversation.
Trustee Ravi Parakat said, while the final recommendations are expected before the board in February, he would like to accelerate progress on economic development now. The village is trying to ensure that happens, just Jackson said. Ravi.
Robbie, how about I love that the Jackson guy, he wants it to happen now. And then of course they do that kind of progressive present tense thing of, well, we're trying to ensure that that happens now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cost is a factor too. How expensive these economic development moves and vitality initiatives are depends on the village's priorities, whether that be acquiring and developing new spaces or retrofitting old ones. And there's only roughly 4.7 square miles to work with. Wesley also said he wants to ensure natural economic growth in Oak Park through policymaking and decisions rather than relying solely on outside grants or funds.
Hey, how about
Quote,
that?
it's important that we all get alignment on what actually our goals are and what projects we want to prioritize, because that will greatly influence cost, Crawford said. A lot of this is going to take a coordinated effort on redevelopment, which is obviously more expensive.
Well, then shouldn't it be a discoordinated or uncoordinated, I suppose? If it was cheaper, is that what that means? If only they had just a dictator saying, okay, this is not going to be coordinated and it's not going to be collaborative. But guess what? It's going to be very cheap. And you know what it means? That people are going to have to develop businesses without grants, without outside loans from the FHA or something like that, and do it themselves. After all, that's what built Oak Park from the beginning when you apparatchiks and comrades, or before you got control and the reins of the whole thing.
The next article is better.
Okay.
It ties into this one.
Okay. Is it an opinion piece?
Oak Park appears poised to offer reparations to Black residents.
Here we go.
A task force urges a mix of financial and policy-related reparations. Policy-related. I haven't heard about that.
Mm.
The village of Oak Park is considering how to give reparations to Black residents in an attempt to acknowledge historical harms to the Black community and improve racial equity in the future, 4 years after a task force formed to study the issue.
Because there's not going to be a greater economic development plan than handing people money, right?
The Oak Park Reparations Task Force, formed in 2020, finished its report on such harms to the Black community that contained suggestions for amends and compensation in February 2024. They included a formal apology and a mix of financial and policy options, including purchasing the historic East Avenue home owned by the family of Oak Park chemist Percy Julian. So,
Reminds me,
a formal apology.
Yeah, it's going to be formal and very official. We're going to be very apologetic. And it reminds me of the time, remember when we did that thing about the Oak Park Church, that first Unitarian church or whatever, that banned white composers during Lent and all of these outreach things, and the resident from Austin said, we could just use the money. So building up and purchasing a multi-million-dollar home that used to be the residence of Percy Julian could just be given, the Black residents of Oak Park could just be given money instead. I would like to see a referendum on that. Only Black people in Oak Park can vote. Should we buy the Percy Julian house to satisfy and assuage our white guilt and then use it as a museum of sorts, or should we just give you money? What do you think the response would that be?
Give money.
Yeah.
Several members of the village board urged action. Quote, I do not want to continue to listen to the recommendations, but also make sure we keep our foot on the pedal here and not slow down or become complacent. trustee Chibuke and said, there's people that are still being denied housing to this day. This hasn't ended just because we've said we're this village of equity. We have to actually walk that walk.
And let's do that, deny more housing by taking over and making a public house out of of a residence.
Trustee Lucia Robinson, however, asked first for a deeper historical study of a century plus of discrimination against Black residents so that the village can craft a better articulated and more authentic apology for its actions.
Not to see the veracity of it and whether it's valid, yeah. But just to see,
that doesn't matter.
just to compose the official "we're very sorry" statement.
Quote, we cannot have an apology that says, well, the reparations task force said we did bad things, and so we're sorry, Robinson said. We have to take more ownership than that. We have to say, we did the work to figure out what the history was of this community.
Oh my God. Oh, these people peddle in guilt. They're guilt peddlers. That's all they do.
Village manager Kevin Jackson said that while the village has to address legal concerns for a reparations program, it doesn't mean they can't move forward on some of the issues in the meantime, but didn't specify at the July 16th meeting what that might look like. Christian Harris and Nancy Alexander, two members of the task force, detailed examples of historical harms to the Black community at the village board meeting last week. One example, Alexander noted, is when white Oak Parkers got the village board to rescind a building permit for a Black congregation that purchased property on Cuyler Avenue and Chicago Avenue. The congregation later built Mount Carmel Baptist Church in 1905 on what is now Westgate Avenue near Harlem Street and Lake Street, only to have it burn in a, quote, mysterious fire.
Oh, look at the implication there. Sounds very much akin to some of the accusations that we covered earlier on. This is the Canadian residential schools.
That area was the hub of Oak Park's small Black community. It was soon rezoned for commercial development and is now the core of downtown Oak Park. Those choices to rename and redevelop erase the evidence of Oak Park's early Black residents, Alexander said.
Well, no, actually, did it really? Because I think there's evidence of Oak Park's early Black residents by the fact that there were Black residents in Oak Park. Aren't they? Aren't they evidence? Go ahead.
The task force members also pointed out the struggles Black families faced in the 1960s and 1970s to purchase homes in Oak Park. In some instances, white people became, quote, straw buyers and bought homes on behalf of Black purchasers, Alexander said. And while Oak Parkers might think racial equity is already prevalent here, with a middle school, for example, named after famed scientist Percy Julian, the Julian family nonetheless continues to face struggles without compensation, Alexander said.
Well, wait, if he's that acclaimed, and
what does that even mean?
I don't even what does that mean? Face struggle. If he's that acclaimed and was so successful, what was he, a physicist? They said. Then why are they struggling?
Oh, that's why they want to buy the home
for the the family of Percy Julian.
Yes.
Oh my God, this is insane. We have to be very Jeffrey Jordan, and if Oprah ever, adopts some Chinese kid or something like that, those people, we have to be very concerned about their well-being going forward. We got to buy them a home.
So this is part of the plans in the task force. Include a formal apology and a mix of financial and policy options, including purchasing the historic East Avenue home owned by the family of Oak Park chemist Percy Julian.
Oh, he's a chemist.
They're paying off the home. They're just.
Oh, I thought they were purchasing it for the purpose of what? Making it a public house, or?
Well, I think they are, but I think that.
Oh, but the family
I think the family is struggling financially, but they still own the home.
So they want to buy them out.
Exactly.
Oh my. What about the people whose lives are ruined during COVID?
Harris
small
said
businesses that close.
Harris said reparations are necessary because racial equity initiatives tend to fall short of addressing the past and focus instead only on the future.
That's Kamala Harris, unburdened by the past.
Quote, how can we truly build an equitable economic future for Black people when many of the laws, systems, and people that have historically extracted wealth from the Black community still exist with no signs of changing, he asked. We must look back to repair the harm.
What?
What does
These
that mean?
they're living in a fantasy world. What laws are on the books to do this?
Quote, we do have a tendency here in Oak Park to put rose-colored glasses on the history of our actions, Village President Vicky Skaman acknowledged at the meeting. Reparations could be a step toward changing that. Oak Park is not alone in this effort. Evanston was the first United States city to issue reparations for Black residents. Its first phase involved giving 16 residents $25,000 each for home repairs or property costs. But now the city is facing a lawsuit over its program. A conservative group claims it is unconstitutional because the payments are based on race.
Oh, that 14th Amendment comes back sometimes to bite you in the ass.
And reparations aren't a new idea in the United States either, one public commenter pointed out at the July 16th meeting. According to the Department of African American Studies at Princeton University, slave owners got reparations while the enslaved persons got nothing. What? According to the National World War II Museum, Congress also paid reparations to Japanese Americans after their incarceration, and 9/11 survivors received compensation too, according to WSHU. So how might Oak Park try to repair harm done to the Black community? Oak Park reparations options. The task force recommended that village officials first issue an official apology for policies, practices, and procedures that have been harmful to the Black community. They're also asking for the village to partner with financial institutions to create housing-related services for the Black community.
As long as no Black people work there.
This could help create equitable opportunities for home ownership, maybe through low-interest loan or down payment assistance programs. The task forces, plural, also suggested creating a, quote, Percy Julian Restorative Justice Fund and Foundation, a nonprofit that advocates for restorative justice and works to repair effects of discrimination and racism. The village board, the task force said, should commit 50% of inclusionary zoning funds to this, as well as $350,000 in startup funds.
Well, they do have some money freed up because they're not funding that housing center anymore.
That's right. The village board has already spent about $350,000 on migrants, Alexander said. What will the village commit to its resident, voting, tax-paying African-American citizens?
Oh.
What a
ratchet effect, right? We give all this money to the boondoggle that is the migrants, so now we have to give even more to the residents.
The group's final suggestion was for the village to buy the Percy Julian home to create a cultural center, while also allowing Percy Julian's daughter, Faith, to stay in the home until her death.
Oh, so this person, because the way she was born, or who she was born, gets special treatment by having her mortgage bought out.
The task force said they don't want private developers to get a hold of the home, but some board members said July 16th that they're not in favor of taking any agency away from Faith Julian and that she needs to be in conversations about the future of her home. Reactions. Trustee Corey Wesley noted other historical harms to Black communities, including the effects of race-based zoning practices and racist real estate tactics.
Redlining.
Quote, I think there's more we can do here to uncover specific instances of action that this village has taken against Black folks that would justify reparations, he said. A general apology just for commenting acts of harm after over 100 years of harmful actions, I just don't think is sufficient.
Nothing will be sufficient. Nothing's sufficient for these people.
He described how Percy Julian, whose home was firebombed twice, would station himself under a tree with a shotgun, telling his son it was because others in the neighborhood didn't want him there. And Year recalled times he has had people try to bleak into his home too.
To break.
Sorry. During the
Oh
public
no, they're bleaking in our home again.
during the public comment portion of this discussion, Oak Park resident Sheila Wazanga said the issue of reparations is personal to her. She said she's had family members who have faced housing difficulties, who have experienced pain and trauma from police, and personally faced constant stares for wearing her native dress.
Oh man, that's because people stare at you in your native dress. That means give me a grand, give me 1,000 for that.
Quote, it's ridiculous. It's painful, she said.
Sure, this whole thing is. You're right. She's right about that.
It's important that you know that these things not only existed in the past, but continue in the future.
How do you no?
That's not how the future works.
That's not the future. George Carlin's favorite line: "The children are not our future because by the time the future arrives, they won't be children anymore."
Another resident, Lisa Shelton, said that in a light of the aid the village gave to the migrant community during the recent crisis, a conversation about reparations is needed for the Black community. One area of focus should be for people of color in Oak Park experiencing homelessness, she said. Quote, reparations are not charity nor donations, said Dot Lamshed Roach, an Oak Park resident. They are owed. Trustee Susan Buchanan said she finds the village's feedback so far wholly inadequate, noting the delays in discussing the issue. Quote, I want a proposal from the village staff of how this village can take the first steps in addressing reparations, she said. Quote, we can't sit on our laurels, Trustee Brian Straw added. We can't let another year pass without having done something.
Laurels are given to people and individuals who have achieved something. You have no laurels. Unless you're given laurels for wanton criminality and the Ponzi scheme that is your government and village board.
It feels like I'm in a bad
a Ponzi
dream.
scheme.
It feels
These
like
people
I'm
get some-
it feels like I'm in a nightmare right now. I know it's early in the morning, but I think I'm gonna wake up from this and just shake it off and just say, I didn't read both of those articles back to back, right? Like that
But you
wasn't
did, Charlie. You did.
those were just made up in my REM.
Oh, if only. That would be quite the solace. The relief. That's our segment.
Meanwhile in Oak Park.
Get out there and buy stuff from our sponsor, Tridentine Brewing. Do your best to avoid Oak Park, but if you're Black, you might want to start renting an apartment there. Especially if your name's and change your last name to Julian. That would help a big deal. You might have your condo paid for. By the way, speaking of reparations, is the Catholic Church going to receive reparations from the Canadian government for the burning of all those schools, hospitals, churches? Yeah, I don't think that's not in the offing. That's not in their future. Are you okay?
I
It's
think
okay,
so.
Charlie.
I'll be all right.
Remember Plato's line, the world's not our home. Yeah?
I know that, but
St. Paul, the forces of darkness own this world, right? So, and man, are they having a hell of a time in Oak Park, Illinois. It's like a convention. Well, hey, demons, where are we going to hold the convention this year? Oak Park again? Okay. That was a good time. Yeah.
all right, that's an episode.
God bless. Peace. Till
Peace
next
out,
time.
everyone. Take care.